Hi everyone, welcome to our third day of the Reflect, Grow, Thrive webinar series hosted by YWCA in celebration of International Day of the Girl. Today we're talking about respectful relationships, and I'd like to begin today's session with an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the various lands in which we meet around the country. I am joining from Darwin, which is the land of the Larrakia people, who refer to themselves as the saltwater people. They are the traditional owners of the lands and waters of the Greater Darwin area, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I welcome you to share the lands in which you are joining in the Q&A chat function. We recognise that as immigrants to this country, we benefit from the colonisation of the land now called Australia and have a shared responsibility to acknowledge the harm done to its First Peoples and work towards respect and recognition. We recognise that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women are leaders in working to prevent the disproportionate levels of violence enacted against them, their children and their families. We also acknowledge and celebrate that intersectional theory has largely emerged from Black and Indigenous feminist activism and expertise in the United States and around the world, including Australia. We would like to acknowledge the continuing connection of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to land, sea and community, to pay our respects to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ancestors, elders, to those here today and to generations to come, as it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So just a few housekeeping notes to start with. So for any questions, please use the Q&A function, which will be moderated throughout the session, and we'll have 15 minutes for questions at the end. We're also recording today's session, and the recording will be shared in about 2 weeks after the webinar. And we do acknowledge that some of the topics discussed today might be a bit sensitive and may resonate with some of our audience members in different ways. Our webinar series is not an endurance test, so please, if you do need to take a step away from the computer, do so, go get a cup of tea or just have a bit of a timeout. Please feel free to do that. YWCA staff are also available, and if you want, you can message them directly via the Q&A function and they can help you as well. Finally, we'll be sharing a survey on Friday afternoon and we'd love your feedback on any of the sessions you've attended this week. So I'll go on to our speakers. I'll start by introducing myself. So my name's Laura Burford and I'm one of the Young Women's Council members. I'm 28, I live in Darwin and I also work for the Northern Territory Government. So I work in women's health policy, which is why I was particularly interested in hosting today's session. I've actually just written a policy on sexual violence, so very topical and very, very excited to host today's panel discussion. So our first panelist speaker is Khadija Gbla. Khadija is a high-profile, passionate and inspiring African-Australian woman who uses her powerful and inspired voice to advocate equality and inclusion. Khadija was born in Sierra Leone, spent her youth in Gambia, and as a teenager put roots down in Australia. Khadija was just 3 years old when the war broke out in her country, and 10 years later they attained refugee status and resettled in Adelaide. Khadija is the founder of the Desert Flower Centre Australia, which specialises in providing holistic, comprehensive gynecological and urological reconstructive surgery and trauma-informed care for women impacted by female genital mutilation. Welcome, Khadija.
Hi, everyone. Good morning from Adelaide.
Our second speaker today is Dr. Natasha Alexander. So Dr. Natasha describes herself as a Black bisexual British woman of Caribbean origin. She was born in the UK and has lived in Brisbane, Australia since 2014. Dr. Natasha ran away from government disability services to set up her own service called Consentability. This is an independent practice offering therapy, education and consultation to individuals with intellectual or cognitive disabilities and their support network in the area of sexuality, relationships, consent and safeguarding. With a strong sense of social justice, she works collaboratively with individuals and is a fierce advocate for people's rights to express their sexuality in an informed and empowered way. She is a sex-positive, sex worker-friendly and kink-aware clinical psychologist, and her approach is informed by systemic approaches and intersectional feminism. She is currently writing a sex-positive handbook for clinicians working with people with intellectual or cognitive disabilities. Welcome, Dr. Natasha. And our third speaker today is Romy Listo. Romy is the project coordinator at Equality Rights Alliance, ERA, Australia's largest network advocating for women's equality, women's leadership and recognition of women's diversity. As a national women's alliance, ERA brings together 61 Australian organisations with an interest in advancing women's equality. Romy has experience as a sexuality and relationships educator and working on a range of projects promoting inclusivity, including with people of migrant and refugee backgrounds and LGBTIQAP+ identifying young people. She is a former member of ERA's Young Women's Advisory Group, where she was part of the Let's Talk research project on sexuality education in Australian schools. Welcome, Romy.
Hi, everyone.
Great. Hi, Romy. So we'll get into the questions. So I'll just start off today's discussion with a broad question addressed to all of our panel speakers. What can you tell us about the role of respectful relationships in preventing violence against women?
Hi, everyone. In my perspective, respectful relationships, especially for young people, starting very early, even in primary school, I think is a great preventive measure in ensuring that we talk about gender equality, we unpack what the drivers of gender-based violence is and unhealthy relationships are. And as an ambassador for Our Watch, we have done extensive research in this area. And a couple of the factors we have identified through research is that domestic and family violence or gender-based violence across the board are caused by a couple of things like rigid gender stereotype. So when you have respectful education in schools and with young people, we get to unpack gender stereotypes, what boys can be, what girls can be, what the role of women are, and what the role of men are. Women can go to work, a man can stay home and be a stay-at-home dad. These rigid gender stereotypes do actually have harmful effect on young people. We know that it impacts the decisions they make, it impacts the future they see for themselves, it impacts their role within relationships. The other driver and factor that contributes to disrespectful relationships and domestic and family violence are disrespect towards women. And this disrespect is across our society. So when we unpack that at an early age, even with a little child, I, for example, have a 5-year-old son, and we talk about consent and body autonomy in our house. So he understands that he's not breastfeeding, for example, anymore. Well, you would hope so. He's 5. Nobody got time for all of that. We understand that if we can talk about consent at a young age, we are able to start making that the normalized behavior, the default. His body belongs to him, my body belongs to me. If he doesn't want to have a hug, he doesn't have a hug. And likewise, my boobs belong to me and you're not breastfeeding anymore, so body, keep your hands to yourself. So, I'm already unpacking what that disrespect and consent looks like from an early age with a young boy, because I understand that the earlier we start, the better, he becomes well-informed around this and it becomes normalized for him. Another factor we know that contributes to disrespectful relationships is men's control of decision-making in our society. And at the heart of it is the fact that in most of our, legal, political, societal, high-level positions, we have men. In fact, we have still pale, white, cisgender, able-bodied, hetero men, to be more specific, are what we have. And that means that they are making decisions based on their perception, based on their biases. We just saw that with the budget the other day, which did not have a gender lens whatsoever. You will have assumed women and girls don't live in Australia from what the decisions that were made. This is what is very dangerous when we don't have that intersectionality, when we don't have diversity in those positions of power. And particularly the fact that in our society, men are in those positions. So their decision-making will end up impacting women. But also in most homes across our society, managerial role, positions of power at home, we see that we continually have this default where we say men are the ones who make decisions. When a boy, for example, is assertive, he's a leader. When a girl shows leadership potential, she's bossy, she's sassy, calm down. We see this behavior from a young age where we do encourage boys in decision-making positions. We almost turn to them for that. But when girls and women are in those positions, there's so much negative connotations. And this does end up contributing to what we know is disrespect towards women. And the last in answering this question is the fact that we live in a society that still condones violence against women. We have all seen the newspapers, on average, 1 woman a week is killed due to domestic and family violence in Australia. But if you saw the headlines when those deaths have happened, you would think women were asking for violence. You would think the short skirt that we wore said, hey, rape me. Yeah, Or, you know, we just left the door open and somebody walked in and we had a sign that says, please enter and do as you please. The victim blaming, the condoning of violence. Oh, well, he was sad. Well, I heard he lost his job. He comes from a bad home, you know? So, you know, he's just angry and dealing with that. Well, if he's jealous, it's just because he loves you, you know? If he's stalking you, that's true love. We see this in our media, in TV shows, Twilight. I mean, come on, a vampire stalking you, just jumping into your house, you know, wanting to put his fangs on you. I don't know about you, but no, thank you. That ain't it. So, to be honest with you, I think respectful relationships in school as early as we can. I would love to see it in kindy. I think let's start at kindy with those damn toys, the blue and the pink and the trucks for the boys and the dolls. My 5-year-old son has a baby. It's chocolate brown that looks just like him and smells like chocolate. Don't ask me why it smells like chocolate. It just smells like chocolate. And that's his baby. He feeds it. He tells me he needs to change its nappy. It's cold money. We get a jacket. And going to kindy, he actually has to fight the girls for the dolls. It's like, and I've told him, you know, wait your turn and all of that. Wait your turn. Don't be entitled now. None of that male privilege around here. Calm down. But he wants the doll. So what I have been told from kindy is that other boys are now feeling like they can play with the doll, not just the talk. That it's actually okay to want the doll as well. And he does play with the talk as well when he wants them, because he gets to have choices rather than being defined by his gender or what's between his legs. Because we know how harmful those stereotypes then end up being.
That's so great. It's great.
That's wonderful. It's so good to hear about a 5-year-old boy challenging gender roles, how that's just inspired my day. Thank you so much, Khadija. That was wonderful. Natasha or Romy, do you have anything to add to Khadija's overview?
I'll let Romy go next.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I think Khadija covered a lot of it, really. I don't know what more there is to add. But basically, like Khadija said, we do know that gender norms and gender inequality are a really critical driver of gender-based violence. And so building respectful relationships are a really important way to try to shift these ideas and to do it in people's real lived worlds and their lives as they relate to one another and negotiate friendships and relationships. And we often talk about respectful relationships as something that we teach in schools. And I guess the idea behind that is to try to reach people as early as possible. And we know that school education can be a great opportunity to reach a whole lot of people at once at a really kind of critical time in their lives. But having said that, it's definitely not perfect. School education doesn't reach everyone, but it's one way or one strategy that's being taken to try to reduce gender-based violence.
I just wanted to add something. You know, both of you have covered so much. I just have a little bit to add. Just something that I've heard more since being in Australia, and it's the saying, you don't hit girls. And I don't know, my son, I have a 10-year-old and a 4-year-old. And I just heard, it was a sort of an extended family member saying to my son, Zach, don't hit girls. And I said, well, shouldn't we be telling him not to hit anyone? Like, why do we have that, you don't hit girls, but the implication is you can hit other people? So, you know, I always question that and challenge that whenever I hear it, because we should be telling people we don't hit anyone, regardless of gender. It's not about one particular gender. It's about all genders. We don't hit people as a way of, you know, reconciling our differences. That's what I have to add to that.
Absolutely. And it's still, I think, unintentionally furthering that gender divide of men being the powerful and, you know, ones who use violence to get the message across, whereas women are passive and need to be protected. So it undercuts itself by doing that.
And Laura, it's not gender inclusive. We know that, you know, we have non-binary people as well. It is not gender inclusive. So once again, we have that cisgender default, and we don't want that. We want to be inclusive of all genders and all sexualities in our conversations with our children from an early age. So that's also normalized.
Yeah, definitely. Great, thank you all. I'll move on to our next question now that we've given a bit of an overview of what the role of respectful relationships is in preventing violence against women. So Romy, I'll start with you. In your experience working as a sexuality educator with young women, both with ERA and previously as a sexuality and relationship educator, what do you think are some of the key issues when it comes to respectful relationships?
It's a great question. So I guess I'm 27 now, but I started working as a sexuality educator when I was maybe, I think, about 22. And at the same time as doing that, I was part of this young women's group called YWAG, and we were working across the country as volunteers to try to advocate for better sex ed in Australia. And as part of that, we had a survey project called Let's Talk in 2015, and it was a survey of young people's experiences of their sex ed. And the thing that came up again and again throughout that, and that young women in particular just wanted to know more about, was consent. And so young women were telling us that consent was absolutely crucial to respectful relationships, and at the core of being able to have them, I suppose. And at that point in time, we had 63% of the people who completed the survey telling us that they didn't learn anything about consent in their school sex education, and even less about pleasure. I hope and think that those numbers have probably gone up since then, but at the time that was a pretty staggering statistic. So consent was the thing that these young people wanted to be able to have to negotiate respectful relationships, including safe and respectful sex. And I guess that really hit home for me because as a young person at the time as well, I felt like those were also the things that I was struggling with and that I was seeing my friends struggle with. And I think that, like, while consent seems like it's a fairly simple concept, I mean, there are nuances to it that it needs to be negotiated over and over again for, you know, each kind of time and each event and act, and that it can be shifted by power dynamics like age or being, you know, having had some drinks or taken some drugs, and that can change whether you can freely give consent. I think what I learned from other people is that, you know, other young people, is that a really big part of the challenge around consent is being able to actually have conversations about it. And it's not just knowing what the concept means, but actually being able to talk about that and have open and safe discussions with partners about what consent is and what you're consenting to. And I think that that's harder, and it's something that we're still missing a bit in public discourse and school education as well. And so those conversations and being able to have those conversations around consent are really important to sexual activity and sex. But, you know, they're also critical to all aspects of respectful relationships, I think. The ability to kind of safely express boundaries, emotional boundaries, as well as physical boundaries, interests, your needs, and having those respectfully received and acknowledged, and just respected. So I think consent is absolutely at the core, and that's a really key issue, both in terms of sex and also in wider relationships. And there's a lot of skills that can be drawn out around that. The other thing that came up in that survey was that intersectionality really was absolutely missing in school sex ed, whether that be learning about lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intersex, and queer experiences of sexuality and sex, and the experience of culture as well in relationships. And, you know, these are really big parts of our lived experience, and they're really big societal power structures often as well, you know, like racial and cultural discrimination, colonialism, and gender-based discrimination, sexuality-based discrimination. And so, of course, these play out through our relationships in different ways as well. And so we have to be mindful of that when trying to talk about, you know, respectful relationships and what those feel like.
Did you find in your studies, you know, you're talking about how key consent is, as well as this intersectional understanding, that young people just don't know how to start that conversation with a partner? I
think often there's a feeling that it's awkward because it's not something that we necessarily see happen a lot in media or modeled in, you know, the relationships that we would see amongst adults around us. I think there's kind of a cycle of not being able to do those conversations well. So yeah, I think having those, just knowing what to say to have that conversation about consent is definitely part of the challenge.
Yeah, I think especially if it's not normalized, you don't even have those scripts in your head. So I can definitely understand how that plays a part. Thank you so much, Romy. That was really wonderful. Natasha, I'm going to move on to you. I'm really keen to hear about your work with consentability, and I just want you to tell us a bit about it and how your approach to sexuality and relationships is informed by intersexual feminism, building on what Romy was just talking about.
Okay, so as I said before, I sort of ran away from government to set up consentability. I was getting a bit of a reputation within disability services in this particular service centre for being the one who would talk about sort of sexuality. And, you know, there was a bit of a joke if there was something in the photocopier that was about sex, and it'd be like, this is Natasha's, and yes, that's mine. But at the time, Queensland being Queensland, there wasn't a sexuality and disability policy. I think there had been one that had been started in the 1990s, and I think it got too hard, and it hadn't sort of other states have one. So I was left in this sort of difficult position where there wasn't a policy within the service. And also in Queensland, we have the Queensland Criminal Code, Section 216. I won't even go into it, don't get me on my soapbox about it, but basically people get very cautious and worried about supporting people with sexuality and if they have intellectual disabilities. So there was this one time where I was working with someone who wanted to know about safer sex, and I wanted to show him what a condom looked like. And I remember having it, and I was sort of smuggling it into the clinic room so that my colleagues wouldn't see it. And I remember thinking, this is ridiculous. He's coming to me saying he wants to know about safer sex, and I'm having to do this, you know, in clandestine, like, oh, I'll show you it. And then anyway, a lot of things happened, and I just thought, I'm going to go off and I'm just going to try and do this myself because I'm ethical. I work towards the ethics of being a psychologist. I'm not doing anything dodgy, but I'm starting to feel like I'm doing something dodgy within the service. So I sort of left. And I was really worried about whether I'd be able to get enough people, but it's actually been really successful because I think once you offer something, people go, oh, okay, that's something that I need. So I mainly work with adults, but I also work with teenagers. And it's, I work with a very broad spectrum of people with intellectual disabilities, people with cognitive disabilities. I work with people who are neurodiverse. So anyone who there might be concerns about their capacity to consent, or people who are in sexual relationships, but they need some accessible information, or some people who they might be thinking about seeing a sex worker, and is this the right decision for them? Do they understand that that person isn't going to be their girlfriend, for example? I have a few people who, in terms of consent, they're actually going very directly into to talking about sex. So they might just ask, they might see someone they like, and they might just say, can I have sex with you? Because we don't get educated about how does sex actually start. I'm 46, and if I sort of think back to my education in the UK with the biology teacher who had a long ruler that he would sometimes hit on the table to quieten us, he was just not comfy talking about this sort of stuff anyway. So I don't remember learning anything about pleasure or how power dynamics or consent or anything like that. And I saw on the internet, there was this lovely sort of post going around where it was an 18-year-old, and he said, I'm an autistic man, I'm 18, can you all tell me, how does sex start? Because I think he might have seen porn where it seems to just start and everyone psychically knows what everyone wants. And it was the most lovely moment on the internet because people were so kind and gentle with him. Because I was reading it thinking, oh gosh, are people going to start trolling? But they weren't. They were so kind, and it was just lovely to see people coming together and going, actually, this is what happens. There are talks about it. You check in. Consent isn't this 1 minute in time. Can I do this? And then you've got free range. It's a fluid process. So these are the sort of conversations I have with people. And I was talking to someone, and she says, this is so interesting. I didn't know any of this. And I sort of try and sort of reframe things. So I'm going to talk about sexual intercourse just for a second, just a heads up. So I've noticed that in a lot of the sort of visual resources that I use, or video resources, it's always missionary position, and the man looks like he's doing something, and the woman, because that's how it is, it's usually a man and a woman, and she's receiving. So when I talk to my female clients, I'm talking about sexual intercourse, I'll say it, and she takes his penis and she gently guides it into her. So she has control, it's her body, because I want the women that I talk to know that this is what should be happening. It's her body and she has bodily autonomy. And a lot of the people I work with don't have body autonomy. They've been taught to be compliant and obedient and say yes to things. So when I talk to people, the conversations about consent start from the minute that they're in my room, or the minute I see them. I say, oh, you know, what would you like me to call you? If they've got a name that can be shortened. And the amount of people who say, I don't care, call me what you want. And I stay with that. I go, well, I'm all about consent and about you being in charge of your body. So I think the first thing we need to sort out is, what do you want me to call you? And I'm very humorous, so I'll be playful with that. But it's important. Just those very small things are so important. I could go on forever, so you might need to stop me, Laura.
No, I was wanting to say you've certainly touched on this, but what do you think some of the challenges are faced by people with disability in understanding consent and using consent and consenting to sex?
So my area, I tend to focus on people with intellectual or cognitive disabilities and neurodiverse, so not so much physical disability. So I'll talk to that really. It's this really unfortunate kind of situation where people with intellectual cognitive disabilities are among the most vulnerable in being exploited or abused. And that applies to children and adults, unfortunately. But they're also less likely to receive education and support and have conversations about this. Because of literacy and communication difficulties, they might not be able to access information in the way that other people might be able to. So, for example, me, I supplemented my crappy sex education with reading Jackie magazine, which was a teenage magazine, or reading Judy Blume. Like, Judy Blume was so helpful, that author. But people without those literacy skills don't get to do that. And they also don't get, even if they do have those skills, they might not get those magazines. I remember someone saying, she was a sexuality advocate, a self-advocate, saying, we just get like Homes and Gardens and you know, those sort of boring magazines. We don't get those other magazines where there might be a problem page or, you know, kind of sexy things in them. I'm not talking about porn magazines, just mainstream, you know, women's magazines. You know, they don't have access to that. And also then people don't necessarily have the language, so they don't know the correct terms for their body parts. I know what that's like from my mum. I had a very Catholic mum who could not say vagina. So I didn't know the word vulva until I was an adult. She would say Virginia or down there. And that's what I grew up, that this part of my body was this strange, yucky thing that was mysterious, and I had to wash it lots. And I think a lot of people with intellectual or cognitive disabilities aren't told the correct term. So if something happens, they might say, my tummy hurts, or something, he touched my tummy. And they're not able to sort of communicate what's happened, or they might not even know that that's not what's supposed to happen, because they haven't been taught about that. So that's the sort of, you know, kind of sort of abuse side. But then also when people do want to have relationships, that can be shut down, because people might have this idea that they're children. So I hate people talking about mental age, because it's not very helpful. If you're talking about a 30-year-old and you're saying they have a mental age of 4, that's not very helpful. They're an adult in an adult body with adult hormones and possibly adult urges. So that's what we need to be thinking of them as. So people then, you know, try and shut things down. I've heard of people, if they had an adult son masturbating, that they're sort of treating it as if he's like a toddler masturbating a lot. So they're distracting and trying to move them away, whereas actually that's a completely normal and natural thing to do. They just need to redirect so that they're doing it in private, or that they know that they can do it in an effective way, so they're not getting sore. I've gone off track here, sorry. Yeah, there's just so many challenges that just aren't being addressed. And I think it's because people don't know how to have these conversations. Yeah. But what I did was I just kind of thought, well, someone needs to be having these conversations. And I've got braver and braver as time has gone by. I remember at first I wanted to buy a vibrator for consentability so that I could show people. And I remember saying to a sort of sexuality consultant colleague going, is this okay? He's like, yes. But I've had those moments because I've gone out on my own.
Yeah.
And I remember a dear friend of mine, when I was doing my marketing, she goes, do you think Queensland's ready to have the word masturbation on a leaflet? I was like, oh. And I was like, well, they've got to be ready because I'm putting it on my leaflet. So it's just having to just continually confront and challenge these outdated beliefs and just to be brave and try. And if we get it wrong, we can make it better. But it's better to try than to not try at all. That's my
Absolutely.
view.
Thank you so much, Natasha. And absolutely what you were saying with that lack of language of how to describe even your body parts, let alone your thoughts and feelings. And that ties in back to what Khadija was saying. It's so important to teach consent and teach those words and concepts from a young age at a digestible level. Khadija, I'll move to you. Really interested to hear what you have to say about FGM. I have listened to some of your TED Talks. So you advocate for the practice of FGM, with female genital mutilation for the audience, to be recognised as a form of gendered violence and eliminated. A lot of people assume that FGM is only practiced in other regions of the world, but to what extent is this an issue in Australia, and what advocacy and support is available for affected women and girls?
Thank you, Laura. That's actually a great conversation. And I think before we start, we should actually define what FGM is, so we're not assuming knowledge. We just talked about how we always assume knowledge that people may or may not have. So for everyone listening, FGM is short for female genital mutilation. WHO defines FGM as all procedures that involves a partial or total removal of the female genitalia for non-medical or cultural reasons. And I like to really make sure for the Australian audience, we have to be mindful that FGM also does include labiaplasty when forced on the girls under the age of 18. And FGM is not just it's not just a brown girl, the white, the black girl, the Middle Eastern, the Asian look that we tend to assume. That's actually quite a racialized projection onto the definition. Like I said, it says for non-medical or cultural reason. So if any parent is choosing to have any alteration done to the genitalia of a young girl under the age of 18 for non-medical reason or for cultural reason, that will actually meet the definition of FGM. So you could be blonde, blue eye, and have your mom say, well, one of your vulvas just looks a bit long. Because we live in a culture, let's be mindful, we don't see enough normal, whatever that even looks like, or just different female body types down there. We tend to actually not know that they come in all forms and shape, and they come in all colors and sizes. This is actually a whole different conversation, within respectful relationship and sexual health education in schools. And even on TV, we see so much the male type thingy, but we don't actually see enough of the diversity of what vulvas and vaginas actually look like. So we live in a society where a mom can say, well, that doesn't look normal. It looks a bit long. It's hanging a little bit. I actually am gonna take you to the plastic surgeon to get that, excuse my language, but changed and altered or cut. That's actually unacceptable. Unless your vulva or your lips out there, if you want to call them that, were hanging and maybe chaffing and hurting you, there's no reason to do anything to them. That's actually normal that they come in all sizes and shapes and that they look different and they are puffy, they are juicy, did I just call them juicy?
Yes, you did.
Well, they can be very okay, I'm sorry. But anyway, we digress. Let's go back to them. They're beautiful and perfect the way they are. So unless they were causing you discomfort, there is no reason in the world for anyone to have to alter them. I've also been talking to people who identify as intersex, and we know intersex surgeries in the Western world where babies are born and parents start to decide they want to start altering to choose. They want me to be a girl, they want you to be a boy. In the technicality of FGM definition, one could also make a claim that that will come under that definition, that those changes being made by parents without the consent of those children will actually be FGM as well. I like to say this because as somebody who has a passion for intersectionality, that we must not make assumptions. We must tackle the biases in which we look at these issues, because we leave a whole cohort of our community out, defenseless and unprotected, because we are so busy trying to have a narrow-minded view of what is FGM. Oh, well, it's just those uncivilized people, you know, across the world. Actually, sorry, it could be your parent down at Burnside who thinks that, you know, who's watched too much porn, where everything is tucked inside, because, you know, everything's just inside and looks very, I guess, neat. Yes, thank you for the word. I'm struggling with words this morning. Juicy was a good one, though. But everything is stuck inside and hidden away. Oh, well, that's what all women look like. That's what all female presenting people look like. That's actually not true. Those people, most of them have surgery. Okay, that is not actually what majority of the population look like. So we have to challenge those assumptions and stereotype of what FGM look like. So usually I could stay for a whole hour just talking about the definition, because there's so much to unpack in terms of intersectionality and biases and prejudices. But there are 3 types of FGM while we're at it. So type 1 is when the hood or the hood is prick or cut of the clitoris itself. And in India, for example, we know pricking is a particular form of FGM they like, and they claim that a bit of blood just drips and there is no problem. That's actually still illegal. And we had a court case in Australia where 3 people were found guilty in New South Wales for doing exactly that. So if anyone in your family, anyone who cares for you is telling you that that is necessary, please, by all means, call the authorities and talk to a safe adult, because that's unacceptable. Type 2 FGM is when the hood of the clitoris and some bit of the labia minora, now we're getting very scientific, but to put it more gently, one set of your lips, you know, like, you know, female presenting people out here, we have a lot of lips happening down there, juicy, nice lips happening. Let's go back to that. I like juicy, I'm sticking with it. Nice, beautiful lips. I like it, I'm sticking with it. But those lips, one of them is removed. That's type 2 FGM. And type 3 goes both ways. It's either everything down there is cut off and then you are sewn up, so you have a little hole to barely pee and have your period. Or nothing is cut off, but you are sewn, and then on your wedding night, in some cultures, that's when you get opened up. But if you live in Australia for type 3, you could go to any hospital and they will be able to perform what's called defibrillation, where they'll be able to open you up to give you more space to have your period and to be able to pee and have healthy sexual and reproductive function. So it sounds horrible. That's because it is horrible. FGM is one of the most brutal form of child abuse, one of the most brutal form of gender-based violence, and it happens in Australia. 200,000 women and girls are survivors in Australia. 11 girls a day are at risk of this form of abuse being perpetrated against them. And they could be white, blonde, blue-eyed. They could be part of the LGBTIQ+A community. They could be black, they could be blue. For all you know, it doesn't actually discriminate across class, race, religion. And I want to touch on religion. There is an assumption made by a lot of people that FGM is an Islamic practice. It actually is not an Islamic practice. FGM predates Christianity and Islam. So which means it was practiced before we even had the creation of these 2 major religions. So that actually has no bearing on this conversation anymore. So back to the reasons for FGM. A lot of people will ask me, well, Khadija, why would people do something like this? It sounds like a horrible thing to do. What we know is that in the West, for example, in Western Anglo cultures, FGM has been practiced in the 1980s to cure female hysteria. I think it's really just PMS. You know, what we know to be PMS is what they were calling female hysteria. I don't know about you, but when I am having that time of the month, you better all stay away from me. Don't talk to me. Don't even look at me. Like, okay, I just want yogurt and a bit of chocolate. But back in the 80s, FGM was used as an argument to calm women down. How many times have we heard this? Calm female presenting people down. Why do we need to be calmed down? I have no time for that. But it was used. And then as time has gone on, FGM has been used in the West to cure homosexuality. Hello, homophobia. Welcome. You have joined the conversation. It actually is used. And I know a female Anglo person who had attraction to females, and her mom used FGM to actually what she thought was curing something that is so natural and you're born that way, but that's what her argument was as well. And we know in religious circles, especially very strict, cultish religious circles, FGM is also being used to stop masturbation. which, like Natasha just said, it's the most natural thing in the world. Go for it. Have some self-loving time. It's the best thing you can do for yourself. It helps relaxes you. It helps you with stress. Oh, PMS, it has lots of good side effects. I'm just saying, that's a whole different conversation. But in a lot of very strict religious cultures and religions, you're not allowed to touch yourself and have masturbation. So FGM has also been used to sort of curb sexual desire. So what we see is this attack on female sexuality. What we see is this attack on female autonomy. And it does happen within the boundaries of Australia. We have had 3 successful prosecutions in Australia. That is huge. It is actually huge. But what I want to say to this audience is that to be mindful that while FGM does happen within the boundaries of Australia, we know of girls being smuggled overseas to have FGM done. This is illegal. So if a parent or caregiver or anyone is saying they're taking you overseas, you're going to become a woman, keyword, there's going to be some celebration. I will be concerned, and you can tell a safe adult or call child protection or call the police. That is actually illegal. So given the geography of Australia, we're next to Indonesia and Malaysia, where FGM is actually legal, people are more likely to want to take you over there for special holiday, and FGM may be actually on the table or overseas or to any other country. So this is actually a legitimately real issue within Australia. And I think too often people think it's across the world, and why we're talking about it. And well, it's the brown babies. I'm sorry to tell you that is actually not the case. FGM is very inclusive of a whole range of different people who believe in wanting to subject little girls and young women to this act. And it's against the law in Australia, and we must name it gender-based violence. We must name it child abuse. This is a human rights issue. It is not a cultural issue. It's not a religious issue. It's a human rights issue. Hence, you can see my t-shirt, women's rights are human rights, because that's what it actually is. And to all young women, you have a right to your body. You have a right to body autonomy and safety. And anyone who tries to interfere with that, we should be protecting you. Please find a safe person within your life who you can talk to, because it's our job to make sure this doesn't happen to you. With FGM, unlike other forms of child abuse, you only need one opportunity, and then you live with the health consequences for the rest of your life. And I think there's a question somewhere where I will answer that, what the health consequences are. So any indication that this is something you're concerned about for yourself or somebody in your family, because I've had a lot of older sisters call me wanting to protect their little sisters. It's funny enough that they are the huge cohort of people who call me for support, because they've gone through it and they're concerned that a younger person in their family or young sister may be at risk of this. If you are aware of anybody who's at risk, please speak up. You could be the difference between protecting somebody and making a difference in their lives. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Khadija. What you've just said just is golden. But one thing I absolutely picked up on when you first started talking is the link between culture, but not just cultures in Africa, not just cultures in Asia, but just cultures worldwide, and what we expect women to look like, and what women, female presenting people to look like, and what to do, and all that sort of thing. So addressing those biases, I think, is something
I just add to that. Sorry, I'll try and keep it short. But yeah, thank you for that, Khadija. But a lot of the sort of things that you were saying sort of really sort of resonate. And I was just thinking about a lot of people who I see, they've maybe seen porn, or they've seen, you know, erotic art or whatever. And they think, so the women I see think that that's what they're supposed to look like, but also the guys think that that's what their girlfriends are supposed to look like. And I remember having a conversation with people about pubic hair, because a lot of people think that women are not, you know, well, and men aren't supposed to have pubic hair, because they're seeing everyone looking completely bare. And I'm actually saying, no, it's supposed to be there. But also, so in terms of my own experience, my family from the Caribbean, and I was born in England. And I remember my mother saying to me that I didn't look right down there, because that was the words that she was using. And we just need to be equipping people, so many different people, about what vulvas look like. And there is actually sort of vulva galleries available that you can sort of see. But again, I'm not very neat down there. And my mum thought there was a problem. So she examined me, and I'm 46, and that was over 30 years ago. And that has stayed with me. And even though I'm sort of, you know, someone who's a big advocate for diversity, I still have those thoughts of, is this okay? Does this look right? Is this new lover going to say something? So yeah, we really need to be addressing this and educating people. So thank you for all that you do.
Great, thanks, Natasha. I am wary of the time. We have 12 minutes left. I do have a few more questions, but I think I might pass over to our audience in case there's any Q&A. So I'll just click on the mind my finger. I'm sorry, I'm on my phone. So first question is from an anonymous attendee. So I'll put this to the panel. So wondering if the panel could talk to what signs someone should look out for in their relationship that might be seen as a warning sign of abuse. I've had numerous people ask me if I'm okay and if everything in my relationship is okay. And I've always just said that yes, things are fine, and they just always want to know where I am to make sure I'm safe. Since people have been asking me more regularly, I'm starting to feel that maybe things aren't okay. I'll pass over to the panel. Can anyone speak to that? What are some of the warning signs of abuse that we should be looking out for in a relationship?
I'm happy to speak to that. I have this great book. It's actually by True, Happy and Healthy Relationships. But I like talking about kind of, in here it's got about healthy relationships and unhealthy relationships. And just to sort of keep it really simple, it was just saying about how in unhealthy relationships, you might feel that you can't be yourself around them. You feel scared to say no. I'm literally reading from this book. You feel scared to say no. They touch you when you say no. You feel sick around them. There might be violence, like they hit you, they yell at you. They won't let you have other friends. You feel sad all the time. You feel nervous or anxious around them. They make you feel bad about yourself and you feel frightened. And sometimes I was out in a cafe last night and I saw a man come in with his girlfriend, and there was something about him that made my sort of ears pick up, just the way that he was talking to her. And I don't know, it could have been one moment in time, but he was being really quite controlling. They walked in and he said, you should have just filled it in on the paper, you know, why did you bother doing that? And she was sort of following him behind. And I guess if I was friends with a couple and I saw that that sort of thing was happening a lot, or she seemed scared, or, you know, one person, so I don't mean to be sort of she and he, but one person seems sort of scared, always feels they can't be themselves, they're nervous, they're being sort of isolated, and it might seem like love. So it might seem like I'm checking up on you because I care about you, you know, where are you? I'm worried about you because I love you. But actually talking to someone who's can be objective and say, what do you think about this? Because it can be a slippery slope from that to sort of full on control. So I guess if I was this person and people around me kept asking me, I would probably want to sort of say to them, away from the other person, what is it that you're worried about? Because sometimes people around us can see things that we're just tolerating and can't see. So I would be wanting to have a conversation about that. And also looking up things around healthy relationships.
Yeah, what are some good resources for our audience members about respectful relationships? Khadija?
Yeah, just to answer that in lieu of, I know we have time difference and there's good questions I know you're going to ask us later. 1-800-RESPECT, the hotline, call them. They're great for unpacking relationship. Every time I enter a new relationship, I call them. I'm that person who's like, hello, so this is what I'm observing. What is going on? What do you think? Because they are trained in warning signs. They will tell you black and white. If they're not on anyone's side, they're not your best friend who may have a motive, or people who you think, oh, they're just jealous of me. They are unbiased bystander who understand the circle of violence, and that early, especially the honeymoon, the nice, we know that circle, but also the fact that there's also the green side of this, which is what are healthy relationships looking like. So 1-800-RESPECT, I would say immediately for that person, give them a call. Don't leave any detail out. Just say, this is what my relationship look like. If people are telling you they're concerned, that to me is a red flag itself. I'm sorry, but most people don't get out of their way to just say that. But if people are picking up that behavior, we live in a society now that is so inundated with information around healthy and unhealthy relationships. People are becoming really good at picking up those subtle early signs than we have ever been. So the people who love your concern, that itself is already telling you something. I would say call 1-800-RESPECT. Definitely, I think they will be the best people to have that impartial conversation. They will also tell you resources to follow up on. And please just know that you matter. You deserve to be loved unconditionally. There is a lot of option and sea in the fish. We cannot always say that enough. And we must feel our best and be in an environment where we can thrive. And if anything is dimming your light, queen, it's not for you. That's all I'm saying.
That's a great way to end, Khadija. Romy, did you have something to say as well?
I think I would just add to that person that it's great that you have friends who care enough about you and are clearly there to be supports for you, that are wanting to have this conversation with you about your relationship. And it's great that you have that as a resource and a support to know that that care and that love is there for you as well, whatever you end up thinking about and deciding. And I guess some of the things that I talked about in terms of a healthy relationship earlier are stuff like feeling like you can say what you need to say at any point in time, and that the other person will hear that and validate that and respect that, or at least be willing to have a conversation with you about it. And that includes things like your needs, the things that you like doing. And yeah, I think those are some really important things.
I was just looking up a website because I couldn't remember what it was, but I found it now. It's the One Love Foundation, and it's called joinonelove.org. And they have videos and sort of little questionnaires, and they've got 10 signs of an unhealthy relationship. I was just going to say something about queer relationships, because I've had relationships with people, with men and women, and I know that when I've had my sort of same-sex relationships, there's like a sort of cliche within lesbian relationships that there's a lot of very quick merger. So I guess we don't know the sort of sexuality, identity, or, of this relationship. So kind of, even though those relationships can still be concerning, I guess there are other sort of things to be sort of, thinking about if they've just met and then there's pressure to sort of move in together. There's all different factors that might be going on there as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Natasha. Thank you. I'll just go on to our next question, running out of time as well. Okay, sorry, I'll just go on to the next one. Answered, sorry, just going through the chat as well. Add some recommendations about Mona is great. Okay, I've got another question from an anonymous attendee. They say, I have been told before that my kinks aren't safe and that BDSM doesn't include consent. I disagree and think that if both or all parties are consenting to significantly moving boundaries, then this is okay. Who would like to answer that?
The center of BDSM is consent. It's all about negotiating. BDSM actually could teach everyone a thing or two about consent, because the foundation of those relationships is consent, negotiating everything before you even start, before you even touch each other. You are negotiating your limits, your boundaries, what you like, what you may be interested in, you're constantly negotiating. So before anything takes place, it's agreed upon. And that's not to say abuse doesn't happen in any type of relationship. It does all types. There's potential for abuse, but at the heart of BDSM or kinky relationships is consent, and also consent every step of the way with the, whether it's your green light, red, yellow, green, yellow, red stop, green slow down, green go. Now I'm messing up. Slow down.
Keep it together, Khadija, keep it together.
It's a Thursday morning. We're going through a pandemic. Things just don't work. Red is stop, yellow is slow down, green is go. And you also always have a safe word, which just says, stop everything, So I actually think that for all the flack that the BDSM community gets, those who are not kinky or not, we could learn about the skill set it takes to be in a kinky relationship. The negotiation, the maturity, knowing yourself and being able to work out the things you like and you don't like that you want to try, that constant negotiation. It really is, I think, what everyone should constantly be practicing. Because Romy, you were saying before about consent, we didn't have the language. People are like, what do I say? And now we have all these campaigns going, oh, consent is sexy. It's not about it being sexy. It's mandatory. We should be doing it. It doesn't have to be sexy. It is actually about safety. It's about boundaries. It's about everyone in that relationship understanding what are we doing, why are we doing it, and what's the out if I don't like it one bit, what's the out if I want it just change slightly, and having the language around that. That's what kink is all about. That's what the whole BDSM community is foundational on. So I think also, you know, for the person asking, we must be mindful that people have biases against kink just across the board. There are people who like for all of us to have vanilla missionary style sex for various reasons. I think that is the norm, and kink is seen to sit outside of the traditional. So people are very quick to sort of label it and attack it. But I think, once again, healthy relationships, no matter the type, have the same core values regardless of what type of relationship you have. And I know healthy relationship also present similarly. So you can trust yourself as long as you have a voice, you're able to speak up. You feel like when you speak up, your concerns are heard, your boundaries are respected, you have an out that's available to you when you don't want things to take place. And like you said, it was mutual consent. It sounds like you actually know what you're talking about. But Natasha,
I just wanted to add to that, because the question was that people think that their kinks are not safe.
yes.
And I guess I'd just be sort of curious, is that they don't have to tell us, but whether that means physically unsafe or sort of emotionally or psychologically unsafe. And I guess sort of within BDSM, there's also, you know, people might be talking about consensual non-consent, where they're playing, which is a whole other webinar, where they might be playing with consent, but that, as Khadija says, that's within a safe, you know, safe container of their safe words. And if we're going to have ravishment fantasies or whatever, where one person is being forced, and I mean that in quotes, but that is within an agreed and negotiated kind of space. So I guess I'd just be, you know, the person maybe thinking a bit more, what are people concerned about? You know, where's the consent here? What are the safety concerns? Is there a real basis to kind of the concerns, if it's things like breath play or knife play, just kind of, you know, thinking about some sort of safety around that.
Yeah. Guys, we're right on the knocker at the last minute, so I will have to wrap up. But thank you everyone so much. Thank you all the attendees for tuning in, and thank you our wonderful panelist speakers, Khadija, Natasha and Romy. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to speak with us and sharing your insights and expertise. You've given us a lot to consider, and I know I've certainly learnt more and expanded my understanding, so thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Everyone, if you have any questions, please reach out to the YWCA Australia team at giving@ywca.org.au. Thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'll pass over to the YWCA staff now.